Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Duet Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and marketing manager, Mackenzie, and today I am joined by my friend, producer, resident dramaturg, and literary manager of Cup of Hemlock, Mr. Ryan Borochovitz. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Mac. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing well, Governor. And today we are starting a 9-part miniseries, our first miniseries, I will say, of the Cup.
Does Les Mis not count as a miniseries?
No, it's only
It's much minier than this one will be.
It's very mini. It's very mini.
Could be a macro series compared to that miniseries.
Nah, this is like a true BBC miniseries. We're actually treating it like a BBC miniseries because we are diving in to the 1983 production of the RSC's The Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens, adapted by David Edgar. It was directed for the stage by none other than Trevor Nunn and John Caird, who people will know as the original directors of the production of Les Mis, because Les Mis also opened at the RSC a few years after this production came along. And so, yeah, I mean, and then when we get to when it went on to be done by for film, Ryan, who was our film director?
Oh yeah, I wrote it down because I was surprised to see a name other than Nunn and Caird in there. Jim Goddard directed the pro shot.
Right.
And Nunn and Caird are credited as creative consultants of the film version. They don't even get director credit.
No, they are creative consultants. But
also, fans of the Cup might remember the name John Caird because he directed the Stratford production of Love Labour's Lost.
Yes, correct. Yeah. Wow, this is our third Caird experience.
How do you like about that?
I know. Who would have thought John Caird would have been the most talked about director on the Cup so far?
I still think Anthony Cimolino is the most talked about director on the Cup.
True. It's
but John Caird, if you're watching, we love your work.
We do.
Come on the show at some point.
We would love to have. Actually, I would die if he came on the show. I would be thoroughly enjoyable.
You know where to find us, John Caird.
Yes, exactly.
Or Trevor Nunn, we love you too.
Or Trevor Nunn, he another great director as well, who I would die to work with someday. Either way, so this production opened on June the 5th, 1980. It originally ran for the 8-week season at the Aldwych Theatre, playing because this is a rare play that actually is broken into 2 parts that are like 4 hours long. So there we go. So this played over like a 2-night experience, or as they said, on a Saturday matinee, they would do part 1 in the afternoon, have a dinner break, then come back and do part 2 in the evening.
But those part 1s and part 2 do not correspond to the way we'll be engaging with
No, actually, because we will be doing this via Broadway HD, and what they've done is they've broken it into 9 parts, each being 1 hour, or like just under an hour long.
Yeah.
I
think that was the original breakdown of the television version, directed
Correct.
by Jim Goddard.
Yes.
So Broadway HD just has these 9 episodes, which are very nice consumable chunks for us to just watch one at a time and debrief on that.
Yes.
And it actually, I think, speaks to the serialized nature of Dickens's writing, as people would have engaged with the novel in monthly installments as it was published.
Yes, exactly. Now, Ryan, I never did ask you, what is in your cup today?
Oh, I thank you for asking. Well, I have my official Cup of Hemlock Cup. And in it is a rare one for me, because I'm usually drinking tea on these, but it is in fact decaffeinated coffee.
Ooh, fancy.
How about you? What's in yours?
Well, I brought back my official tankard, as I felt it was quite appropriate for the time period. And today I am drinking, what is it? I'm drinking some Crystal Light with some ice cubes.
Nice. Keep it classy.
Always. Well, yes. So Nicholas Nickleby, and this production stars the late great Roger Rees. And the title role, R.I.P. God, he was so young. well, not really young, but like he was only in his like early 70s when he went. It was very sudden because he was literally just on Broadway like a few months before he passed.
Yeah.
So
Talented, remarkable actor. He's great in this.
Yes.
Like my first encounter with him was Robin Hood Men in Tights, where he played the sheriff of Rottingham, and man, is he funny in that.
So funny. He's so funny. All right, Robin. Now it's starting to get really pissed off. I'm more afraid of getting pissed off.
It's not the size that matters, it's how you use it. Great movie.
What is that, an Everlast? Damn!
Yeah, he's been in a lot of great things. He was, fans of The West Wing will remember him as Lord Marbury. He's, funny character in that.
Yes.
I don't know. Did you ever watch Elementary, the American version of the BBC Sherlock?
I did. He played
basically himself in like a few episodes of that. He was, a distinguished British actor who was friends with American Sherlock Holmes for some reason.
Yes. He also had Natalie Dormer in that as well, playing a twist on the character of what's her name? Rachel McAdams plays her in the movie. Irene Adler. Thank you.
But this isn't a review of Elementary, the CBS version of the BBC Sherlock.
No, this is Nickleby starring Roger Rees. And here's a fun fact. Did you know who was the original Squear when the show first opened?
I believe I also checked Wikipedia last night, and it was Sir Ben Kingsley.
Correct. That's right. It was Sir Ben Kingsley who but then he left, and we got the wonderful Alan Armstrong. Who came on instead. But let's get into this. So first off, Ryan, why don't you tell us your kind of background with Nicholas Nickleby? Like, did you ever read the book? Had you known about this play at a time? Or is it kind of like you were going in fresh?
So I have never read the novel Nicholas Nickleby. When we first talked about doing this a few months ago, I got a copy of it from my local public library. And busy time with school, and I just didn't find the time to get around to it. So while I did intend to be an informed spectator, I am going in kind of blind. I've read some Dickens stuff before. I will, truth be told, I've never actually been the biggest fan of Dickens's writing. I find the stories interesting, but I just cannot get through his prose. I find, it's very clear that he was paid by the word, and it shows.
Yes.
And like I am a big fan of 19th century literature. I love Jane Austen. I love George Eliot. I love Tolstoy, but something about Dickens could never quite click with me. Yeah. But I do think this type of production is the perfect way of breaking through that impenetrability that I find on the page, and we'll talk more about that as we go, if not in this episode and others. But I'm going in like I was very aware of this production, because as I've mentioned on previous episodes of this show, I am a bit of a specialist in adaptation theory in my scholarly research on theater. And you'd be hard pressed to find a book on theater and adaptation that doesn't at least mention this production in passing, because it is a big landmark. It's
a huge landmark. I mean, the fact that up till then, I don't know about too many 2-part plays that literally were like, this is going to be 4 hours both times.
Yeah.
And together it's an 8-hour experience that you have to sit and watch. Like, most plays are done and you leave the theater. It's just like, oh no, you have to pay and come back for part 2.
Well, like, there's certainly precedent for it in opera when you think about like Wagner's Ring Cycle.
Yes.
Several long plays, each are like about 3 hours a piece, and and then after this, it kind of opened the floodgates for things like Angels in America, which not as long, but certainly followed a similar model.
Yes, it's another 2-parter, but okay, perfect. So you had read some Dickens growing up. You had heard heard references of this play, but this was your first kind of experience watching this.
Yes.
Via Broadway HD.
And it should be clear to the audience listening in at home that we are watching this one episode at a time and recording these episodes after. So neither one of us is skipping ahead in the sequence of episodes.
We're definitely not skipping ahead. But now, mind you, I grew up with this beautiful book at my daycare that was literally a breakdown of the entire Dickens panoramic kind of look at Dickens. And there is a whole double-page spread in this book all about all about Nicholas Nickleby.
Like,
So
I'd
I
hope there would be.
knew-
It's one of his major novels. He
Yeah,
only
so-
wrote like 15 novels total, I believe. Like, it'd be
Yes.
weird if there wasn't a big spread on Nicholas Nickleby in illustrated
Yes.
Dickens book.
Yeah, so Nicholas Nickleby's in here. I've been read the plot, and then growing up, my mom used to read to me the Great Illustrated Classics books, and there's quite a few Dickens in there. Like I had done David Copperfield, Great Expectations, Oliver Twist, Tale of Two Cities, which is my personal favorite Dickens book. And the nice thing about those Great Illustrated Classics is they are the abridged version, so there's a lot of prose cuts. So having to go back and read this book unabridged. Mind you, I did the audiobook, so I sped up the speed a little bit to kind of make myself move a little bit faster, because if not, it drags. So having read the unabridged, I'm like, oh yeah, you definitely can tell Dickens was a man who was paid by the word. And mind you, he was a really kind of, great writer, not a great human being for what he did to his family.
I did not know that. I always thought like he championed the poor and all these like important social causes. I would have thought he was a very decent fellow.
No. So this is something I learned when I was on my other show before the Downbeat, when we were breaking down Oliver. Is turns out Dickens had a mistress who came in and lived with them, and then he kicked his old wife out, kept the kids from her, like was not the nicest guy, plus also the fact that it was either his sister or sister-in-law at 17 died in his arms. Hence why there's a lot of young women who seemingly die in his books. Like he never seemed to have gotten over that experience. So he wasn't like the most like nicest of guys, but fantastic writer. Like you're right. Like he did champion a lot of causes. He was very open to that type of thing. Like when Oliver Twist came out in the first edition, it was a lot of references to Fagin as the Jew and was very kind of anti-Semitic. He was called out for it, and then in future publications, editions, he actually removed a lot of the anti-Semitic things because Jewish family actually wouldn't buy the house from him. So he was very good at.
To be fair, I think that's like a good indication that he's open to constructive criticism and actually changing when things are brought to his attention. Like he didn't do whatever the 19th century equivalent of a Twitter rant about how I'm leaving the left because I'm so censored. Like, you know, so, you know, it's, I don't blame people for needing to learn and then learning.
Yeah, exactly.
At least he didn't dig in his heels and say, no, this character is always the Jew.
Yes. Yeah. No, but like, I mean, watching this production, and we're gonna get into this, but this, you can very clearly tell this is a Dickens work. Like the character, there's a lot of carryover characters or character types.
It has the Dickensian aspect. Shout out to fans of The Wire.
So why don't we get into this? So Ryan, what was the standout of part one for you? Like, who do you feel is either best performed, or what kind of production element really kind of stood out to you in this?
That's a tough one. So because this is such a big cast, like it's sort of hard to pinpoint specific performances and characters, I think, aside from obviously Roger Rees, who, you know, the titular role, so to speak. But I had to like look through the credits and like try to like pinpoint or write down, okay, which people have we even seen be prominently featured? The credits were listed in alphabetical order, and that's not very helpful when people are playing upwards of like 4 or 5 characters a piece.
I think it's because the credits are going to be the same after every thing. Like they weren't specialized credits. It was like, this is going to be the same credits that are going to show up at the end of each one of them. So.
And this is like truly an ensemble piece that kind of deserves shout out every single one of these performers, although we won't do that here because we'll be here for a while. But like I just like trying to like pick out like who have we actually like seen prominently. I counted like 11 actors who like got major roles. And looking through this list, one that I kind of really do want to give a shout out is John Woodvine as Uncle Ralph Nickleby.
Yes.
Because that is quite the performance, I must say. He's very cold and calculating, quietly menacing, but not in like a very in-your-face way like Squears is, sort of. Later, and we could talk about Squears more as well, like these two, like, okay,
trust me,
father figures. Like
we will talk about Squears, don't worry.
Yeah, but yeah, Ralph is just, it's kind of, there's an interesting moment when he's first introducing himself to like our little, Nickleby family. They're like, hello, yes, I'm your husband's brother, he was a fool, and like, it's just so very apparent to the characters and by extension the audience that, okay, this is not someone we want to hitch ourselves to, but we are so poor that we really don't have an option.
Yes.
So I even though we haven't seen so much of him yet, and I'm sure he will become more integral to the plot as it goes on.
He becomes very integral to
I can see the seeds of his importance brewing, and I look forward to seeing how it plays out.
This was a very good example of, in a lot of shows where like episode 1 has to set up some of the major characters, like some of the major plot points. This was a very clear example of, this was the setup episode where it's like, we got to set up some very key characters, like you said, the uncle, the mother, the sister, the landlady.
The landlady was really fun too. I was thinking of giving her a shout out. Wrote down the actress's name here who plays her. Jane Downs. No, Jane Downs was the mother. Sorry, Rose Hill played a Miss Lecrevy.
Yes,
and
Miss
I thought she was a hoot every time she was on screen. She was like very fun and bubbly.
Yes, yeah. So you have her. You have you have the Squears family, which includes the daughter, the mother, Mr. Squears. Like you have, like you're setting up a bunch of key characters who are going to build. So this was a very good setup episode where at the end you're like, okay.
Even people like Mr. Newman Noggs, who the actor who plays him is named Edward Petherbridge. And if that actor name doesn't sound like a Dickens character, I don't know what does.
Yes, Mr. Nobbs, once again, having known a little bit more of the plot, because I have read some of the book and I'm a little bit further ahead in the book than I am in the show. So I do know a little bit more about what's going to happen on that front. So I'm not going to spoil it for you. But once again, Nobbs, like the uncle, these are all characters who will come back. This is a very much a sprawling, epic Dickensian tale where like you have these characters that show up once and then they show up like chapters later. This was kind of Dickens's big epic work where like you have a lot of characters, a lot of storylines intersecting throughout time. So it'll be interesting to see how this play will distill that down.
Yeah. Well, you asked me like favorite actor and then favorite production element. I'll save my production element. You shout out an actor before I do.
Right. Okay. So my favorite actor is someone who we actually just talked about in our Les Mis review, and he is by far one of my favorite actors of all time, and that is Mr. Alan Armstrong.
Nice.
And he
Mr. Squears.
Yes, he was Mr. Squears. So I got really excited when at the opening when they were doing the prologue and he has his little 2-line of the prologue, and I was like, oh, he's in this. And then like as I'm trying to figure out, because I knew some of the characters from the book, I was like, who's he going to show up as? And then they start describing Mr. Squears with the one eye, the kind of the pocked face.
Yeah, I love the introduction with the newspaper where he's like so very clearly there's a guy hiding behind there waiting for a big reveal, and then 2 women come in the back. We're like, oh, he's horrid, and then he to be fair, they've obviously made him up to be kind of horrid. But with that introduction, I was expecting him to be like grotesque, deformed Phantom of the Opera kind of like, and he was just like a bad looking dude. He wasn't like exceptionally hideous.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing about Mr. Squears is he's never supposed to be like Phantom level ugly. Like Jim Broadbent plays him in the film version that was done in the early 2000s. And once again, it's that thing of just ugly enough that you would kind of give him a second look. That kind of is showing a little bit of the underbelly of who this man is. Like some of the evilness is kind of exuding out from his one blind eye, but
not so ugly that you won't drop off orphans with him.
Correct. That's the thing there. That's the thing there. So yeah, it's Mr. Squears. Because once again, like what Alan Armstrong, like the fact that he goes on to play Thénardier a few years after this, I was like, okay, I can clearly see why Trevor Nunn and John Caird brought you back to play Thénardier, because basically you're playing the same role.
Okay, since you're bringing that up anyway, can we just talk about how similar this is to Les Mis?
This is so... I mean, basically you have the same production team. You have John Caird, Trevor Nunn, and John Napier doing the sets. And if you've ever seen images of the original Les Mis set, not the new rinky-dink version that they're doing now, but like the original RSC that went over to the West End that had the turntable, like the set was similar, the costumes are similar, like the fact that the daughter or the sister, sorry, Kate is dressed in like the very same outfit as like Cosette does, with the black outfit with kind of like the white frill collar. Like you have a lot, some actors, like I believe Roger Addams shows up in this, and he was one of the original and he was the original Javert. If not, he doesn't show him this. He was part of the RSC at the time. When you have Alan Armstrong, also, who went on to play Thénardier. Like they're all very similar characters.
The whole Squears family just feels like the Thénardiers to me, and like it's kind of not like a perfect one-to-one comparison, but I feel like our
pretty
hero
close.
Our hero Nicholas kind of is like this Valjean good man in a bad world sort of character. Yes. I see Uncle Ralph kind of as like a bit of a Javert type.
Yeah.
Kate definitely has like kind of, to me, fluctuates between Cosette and Fantine a little bit.
Yes.
And like she's probably gonna become a prostitute at one point. I don't know that for a fact, just like calling it. You'd let me know if
it gets close.
We will find out as we get to future episodes. I'm just like, I'm sure at some point, this poor virginal young lady is going to have some kind of run-in with sex work.
Yes.
And and we even have the daughter of like Squeers' daughter, who like that's basically the Eponine. But wait, then is Nicholas supposed to be the Marius? What's like it's so the one-to-ones aren't like perfect, but like it's shockingly close. And this was before they did Les Mis, right?
Yeah, Les Mis. So funny enough, so Les Mis started out in Paris, France in 1980, and then it was a few years after that Kerr Mackintosh was brought the album. And then it wasn't until 1985 when the RSC brought Les Mis to their season with a number of RSC players in key roles like Alan Armstrong, Roger Allam, Susan Jane Tanner. There's quite a few RSC people who ended up in the production, and it was directed by the head of the RSC at the time, Trevor, Nunn, and John Caird. With John Napier doing the set. So
but I just think it's so interesting that within the span of a decade, they did two sprawling epic productions based on 19th century novels with very, very similar plots.
Well, I mean, like Nicholas Nickleby was a hit when it came out.
Oh yeah, of course.
So clearly they were like,
okay, what's on Adaptation Theory?
Exactly. It was a hit, and the fact that like people were like, oh, well, if we can do this, what other 19th century literature can we adapt? Oh, great! There's already a musical about one of the most epic stories around. Let's just bring in an English guy to convert the lyrics and write a few new songs. Like Alan Armstrong is a great actor. I mean, people know him. He also was in Braveheart. People forget he appeared. He's one of the Thanes. The one that Mel Gibson rides in the horse on and bashes him in the head after he betrays him.
Gotcha.
He was in The Mummy Returns. But he's a great stage actor who's very much a rubber-faced actor who can kind of do a lot with his face. Like the fact that like he has to hold that pose with one eye closed. Like it's not a prosthetic that he's doing. It's like just him doing like a kind of a face like this now, and he's gonna talk like this, and he's got a bit of a weird looking face. So he's doing that type of thing, and they're like, he's so grotesque. Like the way he just eats the toast and sausage sandwich at in his first scene, and the fact that like you see him in the opening with that nice looking hair, full kind of curly hair, and he shows up like 10 minutes later on stage, and he's got his hair like all kind of balded, slicked back.
Yeah, like it's. Yeah. I think it's very telling for this, like Dickens wasn't subtle at all, and like as a result, Edgar felt probably very little need to be subtle too. But this character, at least in the play, I don't know if it's the same in the book, but he's introduced literally hitting a child. Like that is his first scene.
So let's talk a little bit adaptation here. So adaptation wise, this is very faithful. A lot like as you said, they do a very good job kind of cutting through the prose. Like the entire first chapter is that prologue that they do, that they condensed very quickly. The second chapter is literally the crumpet and muffins
and crumpets.
Yes. Which once again, reading that, I was like, why are we doing this? This is like monotonous and annoying.
So I'm really hoping that comes back in some significant way. I'm not confident that it does. Don't spoil if it does. Like at least in
so far in the book, it hasn't yet.
Yeah, in this episode 1, it was just that one scene.
Yeah.
But like I hope that's not just an overly convoluted way to explain how Ralph is making a portion of his money right now. Like, I hope there's more to it than that.
So far, it's really just a convoluted way of explaining that point. I mean, I did like that that we got the audience to throw crumpets at the actors.
So since we're talking about that anyway, I was
Yeah.
going to say that was my favorite production element, the way they use the space of the auditorium,
Yes.
particularly in that scene. But like,
Mhm.
I'm sure we'll see more of it as it goes on. But
Yeah.
like, there was like basically a food fight happening. They were handing muffins to the audience people during the bit of a town hall portion at the beginning, and then when the poor were worked into an outrage about this business decision, suddenly muffins are being thrown onto the stage. And I kind of wonder, how did they get the audience to do that? Like, did it start with a few plants in the audience who got it going, and then people knew to follow like in their tracks? Or did they like kind of hand them to people, like, when we say go, throw it? Like, either way, like, I just think that was such a fun. And then,
Well,
like,
it looks like
yeah.
they were choosing very specific people to give some of the muffins to. Like, if you watch that moment of the sellers walking through the audience,
Yeah.
you can see them kind of selectively, but they're very good at the film. I'm saying the filmmakers very good at hiding that giving out moment, and it was very good at just cutting to them.
Well, it didn't really
Bobbing.
hide it. Like, maybe it hided subtleties of like who they were like deliberately giving it to. They were all audience plants. I kind of hope they weren't. I hope maybe some of them were to get it started, and then the audience just knew, oh, this is what we're doing now. But yeah, like, I thought that was just very clever. And something that just made me laugh is, well, okay, we might talk about this a little more later, but the close credits of episode 1 featured the curtain call, and the audience is throwing lots of flowers onto the stage. I'm like, hey, it's just like the muffins.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, having gone over to London and seen a few shows in the West End, audiences there are very much more interactive compared to what, like, we are like over here in North America. We are very demure as audiences. Like, over in London, like, I can still remember going to see Les Mis in the West End, and during a number of Thenardier songs, both with Master of the House and in Beggars at the Feast, the audience started doing the rhythm clap for them. Like, they were hooting and cheering. And the fact that, like, when I was over in Wales and Cardiff seeing a show, when the villain came out at the end, like, the whole auditorium booed the actor, and the actor knew to take that as like a compliment of, oh, okay, like, this is not like you hate my performance, it's you're booing the character.
Well, and that's like such a interesting needle to thread with a character like Thenardier, who's on one hand so despicable, but on the other hand steals the show every time. Like, it's kind of like, ooh, should I be clapping or should I be hissing and booing? Like, I can't decide.
Well, I mean, with Thenardier, and I think that's the difference between him and Squears. Like, Thenardier comes at a moment when you need the levity, because you've really gone through about 40 minutes 45 minutes of literal watching a character, Fantine, die, sell her hair, she's beaten, she's arrested. You have Valjean, who's beaten by the public and then has his redemption moment. Like, you've had a very dramatic fill of time. And like, even when they were writing the song Master of the House, they meant it as a upbeat drinking song to kind of let the audience have levity, which is why I think Thenardier loses a little bit of his menace if he's not played correctly. And that's why Alan Armstrong was so good as Thenardier, because he still kept that menace. Like, you watch his performance in the 10th anniversary, which, like, he's still like, his looks and his way he moves his face in that, it's very rat like he's like, yes, you're laughing with him, but at the same time you're like, I wouldn't want to cross you as this character in an alley, because I'm pretty sure you would shiv me and like steal my money. And like, Squears is just plain evil. Like, watching him, it's like,
and yet he has a bit of that same charm to him, interestingly. Like, I thought the dynamic between him and his wife was very kind of fascinating, because it's so different than the way he is with the orphans, and she's just
he is loving. Like, he does care for her. Like, he does defend her, where it's like, no, like, she does what no mother would ever do. And I'm like, hold on, are we going somewhere sexual with this? And I was like, okay, thank God we're not going that route.
Well, and like, that was such a good moment, because Nicholas's response is like, oh, I have no doubt. He's talking about, yes, no mother would abuse their children like she's doing. But yeah, like, it was kind of interesting, this weird tenderness between them. And like, well, creepy moment when he kisses his son right on the lips. But like,
Yeah.
so like just reminded you, okay, these are still really gross people, even if like, oh,
Yes.
they're kind of cute when they're just together. But
I mean, the fact he carries that, it's not a child. It's literally like a
well, it's
big
an adult
man.
man. Thankfully, it wasn't a
Yeah,
child
like,
actor.
well,
Who
no,
he
no, no,
kissed
no.
on.
I mean the fact that the way he exits that scene of really carrying that man on his, like, I think it's either in his arms or on his back off the stage. I was like, holy shit, like, Alan, like, you're actually really strong. Like, that is not a light man to be, like, not to insult that actor who.
No, but he's clearly playing like the portly, overfed child in a same house with starving orphans. Like
once again, it's the Noah Claypole character from Oliver Twist, who, if you don't know Oliver Twist, he's the Undertaker's kind of right hand, Mr. Sourberry's kind of right hand guy who abuses Oliver, and is kind of the one day I'm gonna get the business, like I'm gonna be the one in charge. Like, it's very clear that, like, once again, nepotism runs strong in Dickens' world with certain characters. So, but yeah, Alan Armstrong was my favorite. And production element wise, I mean, the set. That set gives you so much to work with. From the bridge at the top, which also had a red flag draped over it. Another Les Mis reference.
Yes, but the red flag said, and I wrote it down because I thought it was funny. The red flag this time said, wait, where is it? The United Metropolitan Improved Hot Muffin and Punctual Delivery Company, which was clearly printed before they added and crumpet baking, which I thought was just like a fun detail that it didn't include that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, like, this the way, like, in fact, I didn't realize until they were filming it, but like the upper level of the set actually connects to the upper level of the balcony. So you can actually move 360 in this space. The old Vic was really well adapted to this theory. You have the plank coming out the middle. So you lose a few seats in the audience, but you're giving the actors like a whole alleyway to work with, which I'm sure we will see used a little bit more, because right now this production is being very prosceniumed. But like in the opening, we saw them moving around on that galley walkway thing. So I'm pretty sure we'll see that used a little bit more going forward. But like, once again, John Napier, and if you don't know who John Napier is, he designed the sets, as I said, for Les Mis. So he created the iconic barricade. He also did Miss Saigon with the helicopter, Phantom with the chandelier, Cats with the flying tire. Like, this guy created a lot of 80s and 90s big box musical iconic set pieces. So the fact that we have another iconic, very similar Les Mis set. But once again, the way to use it is so well done. The fact you can have depth, you can have actors move to and from. Like, you have the fact that during the molasses and whatever they were,
brimstone.
The molasses and brimstone scene, you have Alan and Roger up on the balcony there, looking down at this moment. Like, it's great. Like, I just once again, Trevor Nunn and John Napier, or Trevor Nunn and John Caird, really is John Napier's set very well, and the fact that it's so well done. It's like,
I agree. Like, the stage images that were created with this very minimal set could only really be done because of how simple and adaptable the set is. Like, I loved the image of the stagecoach and the crowding around it, which that's like a simple thing you can just do. But like, if they had like a very detailed, prop heavy set, it wouldn't have, been so easy.
Yes.
I liked, in the miniature painting scene with the landlady, how when Kate and Ralph are like walking away, they're kind of standing in place, and then just the miniature painting and the chairs were moved backwards. Like, on a track. Like, it was just like really details like that. I loved the snow scene. Such a simple image.
Oh yeah, just the dumping of the bucket.
Yeah, they just show 3 guys with buckets of snow, but then they pan down to, Squears and Nicholas at the bottom, and like, wow, that looks like a real blizzard somehow.
Once again, like, this was a very smart set and smart concept that they came up with. Like that's the one thing I like a lot about this collaboration between these 3 men, Nunn, Caird, and Napier, is they were very good at taking minimal set and making it work really well. Like, thinking ahead to only a few years later when they all kind of re-up this experience for Les Mis, and they involve a turntable and even less set, because you forget what with the original production, It was literally like a stone brick wall, just like Nicholas Nickleby has, with the lights kind of popping through a few windows. You had the turntable, and then off to the sides, you had these kind of big junk heaps that would come on and create either, like at the moment in Act 2, they create the barricade. In France, in the 10-year jump, they had the bridge come down, and they had the two columns come in to kind of make a bit of a facade of a building. But like for the most part, it's really just like tables and chairs moving on a turntable.
Mhm.
So like that's what's really neat, is that they're really good at creating these stage images from very minimal set. And that's a big thing that I feel most productions have lost, is that they are very dependent on set to help inform the moments.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those things, like even thinking back to like John Caird in his production of Love's Labors,
Mhm.
that is also very similarly minimal set, but he used it to exquisite work with the way he created all those levels and played games with the balcony and that.
Yeah.
Very well done once again. And having those stone columns that became kind of standing posts for people to kind of move around on too. Once again, these gentlemen as directors and Napier as the set designer were very good at communicating and knowing what set pieces do we really need and what can we kind of do with. Because like the stagecoach, you said, it's really just a stack of furniture
Yeah,
on a
very
cart
simple.
that really they could pull on and off. And the fact that you have Armstrong crouching under the table, make it look like he's on the inside of the carriage, and you have Roger Rees as Nicholas Nickleby on the back, as if he's riding on the back of the coach in the cold. It's great. Like
Yeah,
so many great images.
like you used a good word earlier where you described this production as epic in scale, and yeah, well, it is quite literally epic theater. And like in order to tell a story that takes place over such long periods of time in multiple locations, you can't be pinned down by a very fixed set that like this is the orphanage, and well, how are we going to get all these furnishings out? You can't. And I see the Brechtian influence being very strong in many ways in this production, some of which we'll probably talk about more as we go.
Yes. So what do we feel maybe wasn't quite hitting in this first episode that maybe our opinion will change as we go, but like for this first episode, what kind of didn't quite hit for you, Ryan?
So it's not so much something that didn't quite hit for me, but it's something that I take with a little bit of pause here. And I think it will be a sort of constant point of reference as we go through these episodes. The use of expository narration. Just, I get why it's there. This is a very long book with a lot of backstory and an omniscient third person narrator. And that's quite hard to translate onto the stage. That's why adaptation is an art, and it's not, so, and, there is obviously theatrical precedent for the Greek chorus, for example. And this opening scene, which you said was the first chapter of the book, it's just the whole cast on stage, each taking a line, and it is very much a Greek chorus. But this is actually an area I know often on this show we're critiquing, bad pro shots. This is an area where I think this pro shot actually, perhaps, it's hard to say because I didn't see this performed live, but perhaps improved upon the live theater going experience, because it did get to zoom in on individual faces, and you can be clear of who's talking and follow the thread, like cinematically follow the thread of who's speaking when. And every so often when it cut back to the wide shot of the whole group, I'm like, okay, who's speaking? I couldn't pick them out. And I don't imagine that the camera was placed farther back than the farthest audience member. So imagine them trying to pick out who's speaking in that moment. And like, I'm not going to say, like, it's hard for me to say at this point, having only seen 1 hour of this 9-hour theater extravaganza, what is or is not essential to knowing where the story's going to go. But a lot of the moments felt like, did we really need that to be narration? Like, you couldn't. And one thing that in particular that I don't know how I feel about it yet, and I think it will take time as we watch more episodes to maybe I'll turn around on it. But I don't love characters narrating themselves in the third person. Like Nicholas frequently says, and then when Nicholas went with Mr. Squears, he like you could just say you're allowed to, even if the narration in the book was third person. Edgar could have changed that to a first person narration when he specifically allocated it to individual performers to say it. I don't know if I'm going to hate it as it goes on. I do think that might grow on me. And, talking about Brecht again, it is very much signal. I think the point of this, whether it succeeds or not, is to signal to the audience that this isn't Nicholas narrating his story, or else he would have used first person, but this is Roger Rees as the actor, kind of giving you this epic overview of what is happening. The ensemble is relaying this speech more so than the individual characters are. But I don't see much need for that, and I feel like it might have been better in a first person when it is given to specific characters. I have read, I think I actually have the book in particular, in this book, Page to Stage, The Craft of Adaptation by Vincent Murphy. He mentions... That was a good book to read. Yeah, it's okay. It's I don't know, I read too much scholarly literature on the subject, and this is very much for like a mass market, so you'll want to write a stage play based on a book, eh? So like it's fine. But I do specifically recall I wrote a quote from this book in my notes while watching here, and he suggests in there, and he would know if he's seen the whole thing, and I yet have not, but he says that over the course of the production, this narration does subside or become less prominent. So obviously this is the first episode, a lot more exposition to cover, but the way he put it, that by having less of it as the show went on, quote, paradoxically, it felt shorter the longer it went on, end quote. So by having more exposition early on, kind of dragging a bit, but then the longer the show goes on into hours 7 and 8, there's so little exposition, and it's all very fast-paced drama, and I do look forward to seeing how that unfolds. And it may or may not retroactively pardon the fact that there is maybe too much of it in these early chapters from my perspective. Yeah,
I mean, so a lot of the narration does come straight from the book.
I have no doubt. I'm sure that's the easy fix.
I literally mean like they literally just plucked it out of the book.
Yeah.
It's not like an adapted thing. Like it was just like, we're just going to take this chunk and just...
It's still adapted to put it in the voices of actors on the stage,
I guess. I mean, so for me, having, like, for example, the crumpet and muffin scene, it hasn't come back in the book yet. I mean, it's kind of there to introduce Ralph, the uncle, but it's like, when you're adapting, I would hope you kind of are able to kind of do what Great Illustrated Classics did and trim a little bit and make this. I mean, I get this is an epic book, and a lot of these characters do kind of weave in and out of the story, but it's like, could a little more editing be done here? Like, I feel like I feel like there's still a little bit of fat that could have been chopped. Like, I'm going to be interested to see how much more fat they trim and are able to kind of thin down and make the story really kind of lean and easy to follow. Because like when you're reading a book, it's kind of like reading J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. It's great when you're reading those books and you do have all the other external characters, external plot lines about Hermione and Spew or crumpets and muffin debates. But like listening to the book, it's like, you really need a whole freaking chapter on this experience. And like it's like on the stage, it's like, do we really need this moment? Or like we set the uncle up very quickly because he comes right out of that opening prologue with, I am the uncle. It's like, great. Can we not just cut to him and the rest of the Nickleby family meeting up? Do we need a crumpet scene? I don't know.
So I have a few thoughts just kind of coming into my head as you're saying all this. First of all, I did enjoy the crumpet scene. So like, while I do get that it maybe has no direct bearing on the plot or very little and like could have been cut, if I'm enjoying it, there's worse offenders, maybe not so much in this episode, but I'm sure there are other instances of fat that could be trimmed. To your point about like, do we need a whole chapter about Hermione? I think in a novel
it works great. But when you're adapting
why
for
not?
a movie, you cut that moment. I've just recently on one of my favorite podcasts that I listen to called The Cinephiles, they've been doing a watch of The Godfather. And if you know that book by Mario Puzo, there's a whole section of the middle part of the book that Mario Puzo and Francis Ford Coppola cut, which is all about Sonny's mistress and Johnny Fontaine in Las Vegas going to have surgeries on their throat and nether regions. And Francis Ford Coppola just went, nope, we're cutting this because it doesn't fit with the rest of my movie. And so, and like once again, like in the book, you get a whole 10-year jump in Les Mis of surprise, 10 years later, we're now in Paris. 10 years have gone by. In the book, you go through that 10 years. But once again, as adapters, they went, what's really important here? Is there anything that's really essential to the plot that we need to get across? And it's like, not necessarily.
So yeah, to use the Les Mis example again, another sort of thought that I've had while you were describing this is, it is very interesting to draw that comparison, not just because it's the same creative team, but particularly because this is not a musical, but Les Mis is. Like Ali and I were just talking on our Ratatouille episode. For those listening, if you haven't watched that, that was a fun one.
It was a fun one.
But yeah, on our Ratatouille episode, we talked about how the whole thing, you know, Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, is less than an hour long. It's about the same length as one episode of the 9-part Nicholas Nickleby. And it conveys the entire plot of the hour-and-a-half long movie, but with the addition of songs that take moments from, you know, that would have been like a 2-second observation in the movie and turns it into a 4-minute song. And Les Mis, being a musical, does that too. So it is a very impressive economy of detail to know what we need, what we don't.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even necessarily mean that there is fat in the original, just things that aren't as transferable from one medium to the other.
Yeah. I mean, like Faunting's song, I Dreamed a Dream, in the book, you get the whole back, like there's chapters upon chapters about Fantine and her lover, whose name is Felix, funny enough. And we actually get a whole backstory on him and what happens with him, and but yet that's all condensed into one song, or like Who Am I? In the books, it's Valjean pacing on the steps of the courthouse, thinking, and that's like a whole 30-page thing in the book.
Yeah, that's an interesting example of this novel to play has the ability to use songs to condense the novel information, whereas something like Ratatouille, you know, was actually felt like it was expanding the plot in each of these songs, because they were really, you know, something that was a short moment of Anton Ego, you know, tasting the dish and loving it. That's like 30 seconds in the movie. Suddenly it's like a 4-minute song. I'm like, okay, that's, you know, this is how you turn it into a musical, I guess. Absolutely. But it doesn't quite have that same economy of detail.
I mean,
still loved it, of course. You know, you can watch that episode if you need further proof of that.
But yeah, I mean, like for me, like that's where I'm going to be interested to see like how this adaptation goes, because reading some of the original reviews, one of the things they talk about is how there is a lot of fat that kind of drags a little bit. Like reading like where's, like, hold on here. So yeah, like going back to our wonderful Wikipedia, like for example, the New York Times reported reported that there are moments where dull passages are piling up as dead weight. While, for example, the New York Magazine, when it came to Broadway, wrote that it is a middlebrow enterprise doing scant justice to the novel. So, it'll be interesting to see how this adaptation goes.
Well, I'm very curious by that word choice. Say it again. Middlebrow what?
Middlebrow enterprise doing scant justice to the novel.
Like Dickens wasn't writing for the upper crust.
No,
this was coming out in cheap periodical presses,
newspaper,
for the new emerging middle class and lower class to kind of
gentry.
Like, you know, to actually people who were suddenly you know, literate, no longer working all day on farms, had factory jobs that they would clock in and out of, and, you know, had some leisure time, but not a lot of leisure time to read a few chapters of a novel in a monthly magazine. Like this, like, you know, I know Dickens has now become enshrined as, you know, peak British literature, you know, for the upper echelons of society, but to criticize this for being middlebrow, like, you know, that doesn't reach the peaks of the novel seems very disingenuous, or just very foolhardy, in my opinion. Like,
well, I mean, a great, what I think is a great kind of equivalent to what Dickens is kind of like what Kevin Feige is doing with Marvel movies today.
Yeah.
Where like Dickens back in his day was writing serialized chapter by chapter stories. Marvel is doing that with their movies and now television, where it's like bit by bit, we're going to give you a little bit more of the story that's going to culminate in a big kind of finale, which is why something like Mystery of Edwin Drood is so interesting, because Dickens never did finish that one, and we never do know who the elusive murderer is of that
Yeah,
story.
until the musical came along and gave us too many options.
It's true, which is one of my favorite musicals because of that fun bit of
on the subject of
they do.
stage adaptation and incomplete endings and serialization.
So
I'm reading this interesting book right now that I've been wanting to read for a while, but I specifically bumped it up on the docket because I knew we were doing this. So this is called The Art of Adapting Victorian Literature, 1848 to 1920 by Karen E. Laird. And so it's a kind of analysis of historical dramaturgy of the Victorian playwrights who were adapting Dickens novels in the Wild West days pre-copyright.
Right.
When, you could just read a serialized novel as it's coming out, stage a very hastily written play version of it. And, Dickens couldn't sue or do anything. He had no legal protection about it. And he was very frustrated by this. But at the same time, it was also creating more of an audience for his book, and more people who enjoyed the play would buy the finished book when it came out in the end. And what's kind of interesting is that there is this big discussion, at least in this book, about the various playwrights who would take, portions of Dickens' books and have to come up with endings for them, because strike while the iron's hot, get this on the stage while people are reading it, but we have no idea how the author intends to end it. And so, there were 2 stage adaptations, at least 2, that were written before the book was completed. Nicholas Nickleby, one by a playwright named Edward Sterling, which came out in 1838, the first year of the serialization of it. And then one came out by William Thomas Moncrief in 1839, the last year of the serialization, but before it was completed. And reading this book, I've become aware of the fact that there's going to be a character in Nicholas Nickleby called the literary gentleman, who does precisely this, adapting novels for the stage before they're finished. And boy, is our good friend Nicholas going to have some harsh words for this literary gentleman, who was most likely inspired by this Moncrief fellow, who had prior to written one of the first stage adaptations of Nicholas Nickleby. So I just thought that was a fun tidbit that I wanted to hear at some point.
I mean, yes, that that part of the book, it's going to be very fun. I mean, I do know kind of what happens in that moment. I think the last thing before we go, though, Ryan, is how did you feel this first episode ended? Did you feel it ended on a good note? And what are you looking forward to going forward? Because we're just about to hit the hour mark. So we're about to come up to the moment of us being at our 1 hour moment. Same thing with Nicholas Nickleby, part 1.
Yeah, I thought about this a fair bit, because it's interesting the way that dividing it into these neat hour-long segments is probably going to have some ramifications for the pacing of the show, because in the original stage version of it, which this is just a filmed version thereof, there were only 5 breaks. Because the first evening had 1 intermission. So there's the first break, intermission, second break, end of first night. And then the second night had 2 intermissions. So 3, 4, and then end of the show.
Right.
We're going to be experiencing it with 9 breaks that may or may not neatly map onto at least those 5 breaks, and where do these 4 additional breaks come from. I really don't imagine that where we broke off for this episode was one of those breaks, because why blow your intermission an hour into the very long proceedings?
Well, yeah, the break usually came, if I'm reading correctly, the intermission for part 1 was a 15-minute interval, roughly, about around the 2 hour mark, because it was
so
4
by
hours.
The end of the next episode we'll be at the actual intermission. So all that said, while I'm kind of skeptical of, as we continue watching, maybe all of these won't be the most elegant places for it, I was quite happy with where this went. I felt like this was a satisfying pilot episode of Nicholas Nickleby, the series. And I think the reason why is it kind of ends with Nicholas's save the cat moment, where he, shows affection to poor Smike. And, because Nicholas is a bit of a non-character in this first episode, I will say. His name is in the title.
Quiet.
He's very kind of off to the side, reserved. Every so often he'll opine some sort of witty repartee with the various, people like Squears and his uncle. but he's sort of a bit of a silent observer, a bit of kind of an audience POV character, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of through this walking tour of how bad things were for the poor in 19th century London. You know, in fact, there was one moment that really I found off-putting with his character, and that was when he's about to get on the stagecoach and his mom and sister are saying goodbye to him, and they see Squears like yelling for him to come along, and Kate is like, "Oh my god, that horrible man!" And I wrote down the quote here because I thought it was interesting. Let me find it. Yeah, Nicholas says to Kate, "Oh, I suppose Yorkshire folks are rather rough and uncultivated," and like. You're stereotyping an entire region of England based off of this one guy you've met, when you yourself are from the country. Like, you're not like, necessarily as upper crust as most like would, like, you're, and like, it was sort of, I had a moment where I was kind of sympathizing with Mrs. Squears when she described, Knuckle Boy, as she called him, as being, so pompous with his nose up in the air, like he thinks he's better than everyone. And I'm like, if you weren't a literal child abuser, I would kind of agree with you that where does all this unearned "I'm better than you" airs come from with Nicholas? So by ending this episode with, a very nice act of kindness where he doesn't do much, but he is, showing genuine emotion and feeling towards Smike, I think it is a nice turning point that, like, okay, save the cat moment has happened. I am kind of starting to get on board with this character who, as the title suggests, will surely have some interesting adventures as it continues. So I was satisfied with this as like a nice pilot episode, so to speak. How about you?
I completely agree. I mean, going through, and I was like watching along, and I didn't realize an hour had gone by watching this thing. So like, that's a good sign right there that it that it felt like a natural conclusion point where it's like, okay, you set up our main baddie, which is Squears. You've set Nicholas's situation up that he's in this derelict hall / barn / whatever workhouse situation he's now in. We've set up the mom. We've set up where the sister's going. We've set up some of our other supporting characters, like the uncle, like the landlady. We set up the rest of the Square family, and now we've set up our last kind of major game piece of the chessboard right now, which is Smike, who I'm still a little bit on the fence about his portrayal right now, because he seems a little bit too, I don't want to say dumb, but like a little bit too
well, he seems mentally handicapped, like, at least in the portrayal. Like, I don't know if the character is or is not in the book, but
in the book it doesn't suggest that he is, and in the movie version that I also watched, he was played by Jamie Bell.
Oh, I like Jamie Bell. Yeah,
Jamie Bell's very good. Yeah, very good, and Jamie Bell doesn't play him as someone who is mentally handicapped. So I'm interested to see where this goes. I don't know if this is like something that like Smike has kind of had to do to kind of survive, that he's had to reserve himself this way, and we'll see a bit of a growth in this performance, or if it's just going to be kind of this, because I'm like, we'll see where this goes. I mean, I'm happy to see that he was the last, because I knew who this character was going to be important from the reading the book, and I knew I was like, okay, we got to set him up at some point. We haven't really had a moment with him yet. Okay, in fact, we'll set up the daughter, the Squear daughter, who will definitely be a major...
I can see the seeds of her becoming important.
Yes,
cough, cough. She's the Eponine. Cough, cough, cough.
Yeah, but not the Eponine you think.
No, she's not on her own, pretending he's beside her.
No, well, she is, but not in a good way. So trust me, we'll get a little bit more into that going forward. But once again, it's a great setup, as you said. It's a great pilot where we've set up all the major pieces on the board, and now I'm excited to see in episode 2 what exactly we're going to get into with this group.
Yeah. Like, I will say, I think we today, we're watching this in the year 2021, not 1980. Mm-hmm. We've been spoiled by like new standards of serialization with, peak TV, as it's often called, Netflix, Game of Thrones, bingeable content that is designed to be, that is basically, this. Yeah, I'm cutting this some slack. it wasn't intended to be 9 parts. That's just how they made it work for television. Yes. And, if some episodes do end in unsatisfying ways, we'll surely talk about that in our forthcoming episodes. But we have to realize that that wouldn't have been a place for a break in the actual production. And it's not, it's not necessarily, Game of Thrones or anything on Netflix where you can just tune into the next episode immediately after and skip the intro because you're bored.
I mean, mind you, Game of Thrones never started that way. It became bingeable, but like for the most part, during the run of the show, it was a week by week serialized.
Well, yeah, like I don't know, I'm speaking my own experience up until the last few seasons. I came to it a little late, and it was certainly it was very bingeable for a long time for me. Like I did not have to wait a week to find out the aftermath of the Red Wedding, for example. But yeah, I think something that was not intended to be broken this way in the 1980s, we can cut some slack, certainly.
I mean, like the fun thing going through Google Images with this is that this was released in like a 9-part VHS set.
Yeah, and it was released on television in these episodes, directed by Jim Goddard.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, there's a bit of so yeah. I'm excited to see where we're gonna go.
I think this. I also even read that additional scenes were added for the filmed version.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Well, yeah, because some episodes did require an additional "the story thus far" narration.
Oh,
kind of like the previously on Breaking Bad, like Nicholas Nickleby.
Yeah. I think the moment they said that's going to show up is when we get into Nicholas Nickleby Part 2.
Yeah,
and we're going to be jumping kind of back into the story once Part 1 is ended. I think that's where I think that's where they said they added like a brief kind of write up of previously on Nicholas Nickleby.
Yeah, and like the places where there were actual breaks in the stage show makes sense that those would already exist. Yeah. So these artificially imposed breaks would be the places to add things like that. So I wouldn't be surprised when we start episode 2 for this coming week.
That's right.
Begin with the previously on.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I mean, like we're excited to say we've now kicked off our 9-week run of this. We hope you stay with us throughout the entire 9 weeks, and that you enjoy watching along with us. But yeah, I think this is a great spot to kind of wrap up our first episode. We've now set the table. We kind of know what we're looking for going forward. I'm going to keep reading the book to see how we adapt with this. I mean, it's funny. This time I get to be the literary manager.
Yes, like I'm happy to pass that torch on to you because I don't love reading Dickens. But I will continue reading this book as we go, and maybe I'll get some more interesting. There's not a lot about Nicholas Nickleby in here. Her main Dickens case studies are specifically David Copperfield, and there's also Jane Eyre and The Woman in White for other Victorian novels not by Dickens, but interesting book, would recommend. And Karen Laird, if you're watching, good book, I guess.
Good
10
book.
out of 10. Not finished it yet, so maybe I shouldn't give a review yet, but and that's not the point of this show. Not reviewing books here.
There we go. All right, Ryan, give us your classic send-off, good sir.
I'm not on social media, so don't look for my handles. But yeah, I enjoy a good jaunt of theater talk through shows like this. If you really have to tell me something urgently, why don't you put it in the comments of this video, because engagement is important.
Agreed. And I mean, you can find me at Mackenzie Horner on all social media platforms. You can find my podcast Before the Downbeat on all platforms. Cup of Hemlock also now has a podcast feed where you can listen to all this content as well. So there you go. So you can join us on our podcast feed, which is Cup of Hemlock Podcast.
We are currently undergoing our sonnet series, and we are interested in getting people involved from all over the globe. So even if you don't know us personally, you can sign up at the sheet that we will include in the description of this video. And all we ask is that you record yourself doing one of Shakespeare's sonnets, choose from the list. And and you'll add some like little details about yourself and why you love theater. And then once we have collected all of them, we will begin releasing them on a week-by-week basis on this very channel.
Yes, indeed. But there we go. I mean, I'm also going to plug just saying that if you do want some more Dickens content on Before the Downbeat, we did do a 2-part episode all about the musical Oliver, where in our first part we did get into Dickens and the history of Dickens. So if you are wanting some discussion on that front, you can most certainly tune into that on my podcast feed. But for now, we're going to let you all go to go watch episode 2, and we will tune back with you next week as we will break down our review of episode 2 of Nicholas Nickleby, The Life and Adventures.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks.